A man sets out across the endless desert, following the faded map his grandfather left behind. But when he reaches the place where a lost city should stand, there's nothing, only silence and sand. As night falls, he decides to stay, and by dawn, the desert reveals what it has hidden for centuries. Beneath the dunes lies a city older than time, a place of impossible architecture, strange symbols, and a treasure that was never meant to be found. What he discovers will change everything he thought he knew about history and himself. The wind had already begun to rise when Ethan Carter stepped out of the old gas station on the edge of nowhere. The air carried the taste of dust and gasoline, a familiar mixture to anyone who had driven too far into the American Southwest. The sun hovered low in the sky, swollen and orange, its heat still pulsing against the asphalt. Behind him stretched miles of cracked road that led back toward the world of people and noise. Ahead lay only the unbroken shimmer of desert, rippling like water under the dying light. Ethan adjusted the strap of his backpack, shielding his eyes with a hand. Somewhere beyond those dunes, if his grandfather had been right, was a place the world had forgotten buried under centuries of sand and silence. The idea had begun long ago, not as a scholarly pursuit but as a childhood story. His grandfather, Henry Carter, had been a prospector in his youth, half explorer, half dreamer, who spent his last decades as a recluse surrounded by books, maps, and odd relics collected from his travels. Ethan remembered the old man's voice, raspy from tobacco and age, spinning tales of a lost city hidden beneath the dunes. He had called it the city beneath the sleeping dune, a name that had lingered in Ethan's imagination long after the bedtime story stopped. Henry spoke of stone corridors carved before any known civilization, of walls that hummed with their own light, of symbols no one alive could read. As a boy, Ethan had believed every word. As a man, he had spent years trying to convince himself it was only fantasy. But the fantasy would not let go. After Henry's death, Ethan had gone through the old man's belongings, cataloging them for the small museum that had once funded his expeditions. In a worn leather satchel, hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten papers, he found a folded sheet of translucent parchment, the kind used before synthetic mapping films became common. The map was hand-drawn, its ink faded to a reddish brown. Lines marked what looked like an area somewhere near the border of New Mexico and Arizona. In the lower corner, Henry's cramped handwriting spelled the words, "Beneath the sleeping dune." Along the edge, a single cryptic note, "The sands remember what time forgets." For weeks, Ethan had debated what to do. He was no longer the impulsive graduate student who once chased every rumor of a lost ruin. He was a researcher now, tied to a university, to grants and deadlines and the scrutiny of committees. But the sight of that map stirred something deep, something that had been silent for years. He knew that if he ignored it, he would carry that silence with him forever. And so, after weeks of preparation, he requested a leave of absence, packed his equipment, and drove into the desert alone. The truck rattled along the dirt road for hours, the GPS losing signal halfway to nowhere. He relied instead on his compass, a sturdy brass piece with a cracked glass face, the very one his grandfather had carried on his expeditions. The drive stretched into the afternoon. Heat waves danced across the hood of the vehicle, and the landscape bled into shades of gold and rust. Joshua trees hunched like watchful sentinels. The radio crackled with static, then went dead. There was no sign of human life. Only the endless hush of the desert, the dry hiss of wind through stone. By sunset, Ethan had reached the coordinates marked on the map, or as close as he could calculate without modern references. He parked the truck beside a skeletal ridge and climbed one of the dunes, scanning the horizon. The land seemed flat, unremarkable. No sign of ruins, no outcrop of ancient stone, just sand stretching into infinity. For a moment, frustration flared in his chest. He checked the map again, comparing landmarks that no longer existed. The dry riverbeds had shifted. The dunes had migrated. A century of storms had changed the face of the land. Perhaps the map had never been accurate to begin with. He spent the next hour walking in widening circles, searching for anything that might resemble a foundation, a fragment, a hint of geometry among the dunes. Nothing. The wind began to rise again, whispering over the sand in low tones that reminded him of breathing. By the time twilight deepened into night, Ethan was forced to accept what reason told him. The city was not here. Perhaps it had never been here. Perhaps Henry Carter had simply dreamed it, or misinterpreted some rock formation as the ruins of a forgotten world. He considered driving back to the highway, but the desert at night was treacherous. Navigation in the dark could mean death. He decided to camp where he stood. He found a relatively flat patch of ground sheltered by the dune's curve, pitched his one-man tent, and lit a small gas lamp. The pale circle of light was swallowed by darkness on all sides. The air cooled rapidly, and the temperature dropped until his breath fogged in front of him. Above, the stars emerged one by one, so bright they seemed close enough to touch. There was no city here, only this vast silence and the endless sky. As he ate a few ration bars and sipped lukewarm water, his thoughts returned to his grandfather. He remembered the way the old man's hands had trembled when he spoke about the desert, as if something in him still feared what he had seen there. "The sands are alive," Henry had said once, his eyes distant. "They shift to hide what they protect. You won't find it by daylight, Ethan. You have to wait for the desert to choose when to show itself." At the time, Ethan had laughed. Now, under that cold, breathing silence, the memory felt less like superstition and more like warning. A strange sound drew his attention, a faint, resonant hum, low and steady, as though the ground itself vibrated. He held his breath. The sound faded, then returned, rising and falling with the rhythm of the wind. Maybe it was the air moving through hidden fissures in the sand, or the shifting of underground stone. Still, the hair on his arms stood on end. He turned off the lamp, listening. The noise deepened, then dissolved into the desert's vast stillness. He tried to sleep, but dreams came in fragments. Flashes of light on stone, a whispering voice, the sound of rushing sand. He awoke before dawn, the sky a dim blue gradient above the horizon. His body ached, and the desert was colder than ice. He stepped outside the tent, rubbing his arms for warmth. At first, nothing seemed different. The dunes stood unchanged, wind sculpted into elegant curves. Then something caught his eye, a faint line, far across the sand, where the morning light struck at an odd angle. It looked like the edge of something solid beneath the surface. Curiosity overcame fatigue. He walked toward it, boots sinking softly into the cool sand. As he approached, the shape grew clearer. It was not a rock or natural ridge, but something geometric, a broad, flat plane of pale stone, just barely exposed. The surface was smoother than any natural formation, and when he brushed away the sand, it revealed faint carvings, lines, and symbols he did not recognize. They seemed to shimmer faintly under the sunlight, as though catching reflections from beneath. He crouched, brushing more sand aside. The lines formed repeating patterns, circles intersecting triangles, small spirals within squares. None of it resembled known scripts. He reached into his pack, retrieving a brush and small camera, documenting the find. His pulse quickened. This was no coincidence of erosion. Someone or something had built this. He worked methodically, clearing a larger area until he uncovered what appeared to be a seam, a narrow crack that ran along the stone's edge. When he pressed his hand against it, a faint vibration traveled through his fingertips. It felt almost like breath. He hesitated. The rational part of his mind cataloged the possibilities: underground air pockets, natural caverns. But the child who had once listened to Henry Carter's tales knew better. Beneath the sleeping dune, the words echoed in his head. Could it be that the city was not gone but buried, preserved under the sand? His pulse thudded in his ears. He pulled out a small trowel and began to dig, scooping away sand until the edge of the surface widened into a distinct rectangular outline. A shape began to emerge, a flat slab bordered by shallow engravings. As he dug, the wind rose again, swirling the sand around him. The desert seemed to breathe in rhythm with his movements, each scoop of the trowel answered by a sigh of air. Then, without warning, the ground beneath him gave a soft groan, and a portion of the sand collapsed inward. Ethan stumbled backward, catching himself as the slab shifted slightly, releasing a sudden gust of cool air from below. For a heartbeat, he froze. The smell that followed was ancient, mineral, and damp, like the air of deep caves. He stepped closer and brushed away the last of the sand from what was clearly an entrance. A stone doorway set into the dune itself. Its top was carved with strange markings, some resembling constellations, others unfamiliar sigils. The air emerging from within felt impossibly cold for the desert morning. Ethan crouched at the threshold, peering into the darkness. A faint glimmer of reflection came from deep below, as though light touched a metallic surface somewhere far down. His heart hammered. The rational voice in his mind told him to document the find, mark the coordinates, and return with a proper team. But another voice, older, quieter, urged him to continue. He thought of Henry's map, of the cryptic phrase scrawled across the margin, and felt a surge of something between awe and fear. The desert had kept its secret long enough. As the sun climbed higher, the stone surface gleamed faintly under his feet. Ethan stood there, suspended between disbelief and revelation. He had come seeking proof of a legend, and the desert had answered. Behind him, the wind whispered through the dunes, erasing his footprints as quickly as he made them. Ahead of him yawned the dark mouth of the earth, breathing cool air into the light. He knew he would go inside, and as he gathered his equipment and stood before the shadowed entrance, he could almost hear his grandfather's voice carried on the wind. The sands remember what time forgets. The sound faded. The desert held its breath, and Ethan Carter took his first step down into the sleeping heart of the earth. The first few steps downward felt like a descent into another world. The air changed at once, cool, heavy, and strangely still. The sunlight that had burned so fiercely above was reduced to a pale, slanting beam that barely reached past the opening. As Ethan descended, the noise of the wind faded until all that remained was the soft echo of his boots against the stone. The staircase spiraled downwards, cut directly into the rock, the walls polished smooth as if by water or ancient tools. The material beneath his gloved hand was unlike any he had ever touched, not quite stone, not metal either. It was warm in places, faintly humming, as though a low current pulsed within. He paused to set up his small light and adjusted the camera mounted on his chest harness. The beam illuminated only a narrow tunnel ahead, but even that was enough to take his breath away. Along the walls, the first carvings appeared, delicate reliefs running in uninterrupted lines down the spiral. The figures were abstract yet deliberate, their forms unlike any known ancient script. Circles intersected with triangles. Thin lines extended outward like rays. Between them were shapes that resembled eyes or stars, each one etched with mathematical precision. Ethan touched the nearest carving, brushing away a layer of dust that had settled over centuries. The texture was fine, like silk. He spoke softly into his recorder. Depth approximately 12 meters. Carvings continue along both walls. Unknown symbology, possibly a proto-script. Surface temperature consistent with sub-sandstone composite, though composition appears artificial. Vibration still present. He paused. His own voice sounded foreign in the enclosed space, swallowed by the dark. There was something unsettling about hearing himself speak in a place so clearly untouched by any other human for what might have been thousands of years. The staircase curved for what felt like an eternity. Every few meters, Ethan stopped to take samples or sketches. His training demanded precision. His curiosity urged him faster. The deeper he went, the more intense the quiet became. Even his breathing seemed to echo too loudly, as though the air itself disapproved of intrusion. He tried to ignore the prickling at the back of his neck, the strange sense that the passage was not merely descending, but leading him towards something that was waiting. At last, the staircase widened and ended in a smooth platform. The beam of his light swept across a vast corridor. The scale of it stunned him. The walls rose at least 10 meters high, vanishing into the shadows. Columns lined each side, their surfaces carved with intricate spirals and repeating sigils. Between them stood what looked like alcoves or doorways, sealed with smooth panels. The floor beneath his boots was laid with massive tiles of pale stone. Each one fitted perfectly without visible seams. Dust lay thick, but not disturbingly so, almost as if it had settled gently rather than through the collapse of time. Ethan advanced cautiously, marking his route with chalk arrows as he went. His compass spun uselessly. He switched to manual notes instead. Magnetic interference increasing, he whispered, possibly due to mineral content in structure walls. Orientation unreliable. He raised the light toward one of the panels. It shimmered faintly under the beam, revealing the suggestion of a pattern. When he leaned closer, he realized it wasn't simply decoration. The carvings were mathematical ratios and geometries repeated across multiple scales. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice reciting one of his favorite phrases. The numbers tell the story when the words are gone. For several minutes, Ethan forgot to breathe properly. The scale of precision here was beyond anything ancient cultures had achieved without modern instruments. Each angle was perfect. Each curve flowed into the next like calligraphy written by a god. He wondered who had built this and how. And above all, why had it been hidden so deliberately beneath the desert? As he pressed onward, the tunnel widened further and opened into a massive chamber that made his stomach tighten in awe. The beam of his light couldn't reach the far end. The air here smelled different, cooler, laced with minerals, faintly sweet. High above, he glimpsed the suggestion of an arched ceiling, glinting faintly with embedded crystals that caught and diffused his light, scattering it like a dim aurora. For the first time, he felt as though he were standing inside something alive. His steps echoed as he crossed what seemed like a plaza. To his left and right stretched the faint outlines of structures, buildings, temples. Their silhouettes rose like cliffs within the vast cavern. The realization struck him with quiet terror. This was not a chamber. This was a city. Ethan stopped and turned in a slow circle, the light sweeping across the expanse. The streets were straight and narrow, intersecting at right angles. The walls of the structures bore carvings similar to those on the staircase, but arranged into elaborate panels. In the dust near his feet, he noticed faint impressions, shapes like footsteps, though broader and deeper than any human's. He crouched to study them, running his gloved fingers along the edges. They were old, so old that the stone had begun to smooth them away. Yet the symmetry was unmistakable. He rose again, feeling the weight of the silence pressing against his chest. There was no movement, no sound, but the faint murmur of air circulating from unseen vents. The entire city was encased in stillness, as though it had been waiting all this time for someone to arrive. He walked forward, every step measured. His flashlight beam fell upon an enormous wall at the far end of the plaza. Its center was dominated by a relief that towered above him, a colossal eye enclosed within a triangle, surrounded by radiating spirals. It wasn't a symbol of superstition or religion. It looked more like an emblem, a seal. The design was so precise that when he stepped back, the entire wall seemed to shimmer as though it were a single sheet of metal. Beneath the eye, smaller carvings depicted scenes. Beings standing beneath falling stars, rivers overflowing, mountains cracking open. Cataclysmic imagery, but not chaotic. Each element appeared deliberate, almost instructional. He thought of the legends Henry had told him, of civilizations destroyed by their own wisdom, of knowledge sealed away until the earth was ready to listen. Yenam, a childish myth perhaps. Yet here it was, carved in unyielding stone before his eyes. Ethan began to document everything, the dimensions, angles, the order of symbols. His hands trembled slightly. It wasn't fear exactly, but a reverence that bordered on dread. He was standing inside a myth. As he moved closer to the wall, his light caught something at its base, a narrow opening disguised among the carvings. He knelt to examine it. It was a doorway, its edges outlined by delicate channels that converged in the center like veins. In the middle of the threshold was a small indentation, circular and smooth. It reminded him of a keyhole, but larger, designed for something spherical. His heart quickened. He reached into his pocket and retrieved the brass compass that had belonged to his grandfather. It was absurd, but the size matched almost perfectly. He hesitated, remembering how Henry had once spoken of a door that opens to those who carry the same blood. Ethan's rational mind resisted the thought, yet curiosity overwhelmed doubt. Slowly he placed the compass into the depression. It fit snugly, and for a moment nothing happened. Then a vibration pulsed through the ground, soft but undeniable. The wall responded like a living thing. Faint lines of light began to spread outward from the point of contact, tracing along the carvings in slow, deliberate patterns. Ethan stumbled back, shielding his eyes. The light was not blinding but deep, almost liquid, spreading across the stone like ink in water. It flowed through the engravings until the entire wall shimmered with a golden glow. A low hum filled the air, resonating in his bones. Then, with a grinding sigh, the doorway began to open. The compass slid from its slot and fell to the floor with a soft metallic clink. Beyond the threshold yawned darkness. He retrieved the compass and pocketed it, the metal now warm to the touch. Then he stepped through the doorway. The passage beyond was short and narrow, leading into a circular chamber unlike any he had seen so far. The walls curved inward to form a perfect dome. At its center stood a raised platform, and on it rested a rectangular object, an altar, or perhaps a chest made of the same smooth, seamless material as the rest of the city. Symbols covered its surface in intricate spirals. The entire room pulsed faintly with light emanating from fine cracks between the tiles, as though something below the floor was glowing. Ethan approached the altar with reverent caution. The air felt different here, denser, heavier. It was not just ancient, it was charged. Every instinct screamed that this place was sacred. He circled the platform, scanning the carvings. The patterns grew more complex near the top, spiraling inward until they converged on a small indentation, much like the one that had opened the door. His fingers hovered over it, but did not touch. He turned on his recorder again, his voice low. Central chamber discovered. Presence of what appears to be a containment structure. Symbols consistent with outer corridors but denser. Possible focal point of the site. Energy signature, unclear. He hesitated. Audible resonance increasing, ambient temperature dropping. A faint hum echoed through the chamber, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The floor beneath him seemed to respond to his movements. He thought of the cataclysmic images on the wall outside the floods, the stars falling, the eye watching. Perhaps this place had been built as a warning, a memory of something lost, or perhaps it had been a vault, meant to preserve what those before them could not destroy. His pulse quickened as he realized what his grandfather must have suspected. The city beneath the sands wasn't a legend at all. It was a time capsule, a message carved into the bones of the earth. He took a deep breath and placed both hands on the lid of the altar. The stone was cool, almost alive beneath his palms. For a long moment he simply stood there, uncertain. Every scientist within him demanded restraint, demanded that he document and retreat. But the echo of Henry Carter's voice whispered louder in his mind. The truth belongs to those who are brave enough to face it. He pressed down gently. The surface shifted. A faint click echoed through the chamber, followed by a deep, resonant vibration that rippled outward through the floor. The carvings lit up in sequence, spiraling outward from his hands. The glow intensified, and then the lid began to move, sliding open with a smooth, soundless grace. Inside lay a single object, a crystal or stone, roughly the size of his fist, opaque at first glance, but filled with shifting colors when it caught the light. It pulsed faintly, as though alive. Ethan stared, unable to look away. The hum in the air synchronized with his heartbeat. When he reached toward it, the glow brightened, illuminating the entire chamber in a wash of golden light. For an instant, he saw something impossible. Images flickered inside the crystal landscapes unfamiliar, towers rising into the sky, stars burning brighter than the sun. Then the visions were gone, replaced by the steady, living shimmer of the light. He staggered back, breathless. The glow softened but did not fade. It seemed to breathe like a steady pulse, waiting. Around him, the walls of the chamber began to respond, the carvings glowing faintly as if recognizing his presence. The entire room felt awake. Ethan sank to one knee, overwhelmed. All the logic in the world could not explain what he was seeing, yet he knew somehow that this was what his grandfather had searched for all his life. Not gold, not jewels, but knowledge. A record of something far older than civilization itself. The true treasure of the desert was not wealth, but memory. As he gazed at the living crystal, the hum deepened into a low tone that vibrated through his chest, neither hostile nor comforting, merely immense. The walls shimmered brighter for a heartbeat, then dimmed again, as though the city had drawn a slow breath and settled. He stood alone in the heart of the earth, light reflecting off the ancient symbols, surrounded by silence. Above him, miles of sand shifted gently in the wind, erasing every trace of the world he had left behind. And deep below, the city seemed to wait for what he could not yet know. For a long moment, Ethan remained motionless in the quiet of the chamber, the strange glow of the crystal casting fractured light across his face. His heartbeat slowed as the deep hum subsided, settling into a rhythm that almost matched the sound of his breath. Around him, the carvings pulsed faintly, alive with some unseen current that faded in and out, like the slow respiration of a living organism. He didn't know how long he stood there, staring into that luminous heart of stone, but time had dissolved the instant he touched it. The desert, the tent, the road, all of it seemed impossibly distant now, as though belonging to another lifetime. The scientist in him struggled to assert itself. He needed to document this, to measure radiation levels, to analyze the composition of the crystal. Yet another voice, older, deeper, instinctive, warned him that the rules of the world above might not apply here. This place had waited untouched beneath the sands for uncounted centuries. Whatever it held was not meant to be disturbed lightly. Still, the impulse to understand, to see, was stronger than fear. He had not come all this way to turn back now. He leaned closer, examining the crystal surface. Beneath the translucent exterior, colors shifted like oil underwater, forming and dissolving in hypnotic patterns. At moments, he thought he could glimpse images hidden in the flow landscapes, symbols, perhaps even faces, but they vanished before his mind could register them. The carvings on the altar's edge began to emit a faint resonance, soft at first, then gradually harmonizing with the pulse of the crystal. It felt almost like communication, though no sound existed, only vibration. Ethan turned his recorder on again. His voice trembled slightly. Subject emits continuous light with measurable fluctuation. Frequency undetermined. Possible energy containment or self-sustaining reaction. Surrounding structures, responsive indicating integration or power distribution. He stopped, realizing how clinical his words sounded compared to what he was experiencing. This doesn't feel mechanical, he added quietly, almost to himself. It feels alive. He reached out again, unable to resist the magnetic pull of the thing. The air tingled around his fingertips. The moment his hand made contact, a surge of warmth shot up his arm, not burning, not painful, but disorienting in its intensity. His vision blurred, and suddenly the chamber dissolved around him. He was standing on a wide terrace beneath a sky of copper and violet. Towers of impossible architecture stretched toward the heavens, their surfaces gleaming with the same shimmering material as the walls of the underground city. Rivers of light flowed between them, not water, but something fluid and luminous. Across the horizon, immense structures rose like mountains, carved with symbols that pulsed in rhythm with the beating of his heart. He could hear voices, soft, melodic, speaking in a language that seemed both alien and familiar. The sound resonated through his bones rather than his ears. Then, in a single blinding moment, the vision collapsed. He was back in the chamber, gasping, the crystal still glowing faintly before him. His knees buckled, and he caught himself on the edge of the altar, heart pounding wildly. Sweat dripped from his temples. The air felt electric, charged with something vast and incomprehensible. He stumbled back, his light swaying across the walls. The carvings had changed. Where before they had been static spirals and geometric patterns, now they seemed to move subtly beneath the glow-shifting lines, flowing like the current of a river. He blinked, certain it was an illusion, a trick of the light. But when he turned away and looked again, the lines had reconfigured themselves into a new pattern, a map perhaps, or an equation. He raised the camera shakily, trying to capture it, though the image shimmered too much for the lens to focus properly. Beneath the surface movement, faint glyphs began to emerge, glowing brighter than the rest. They looked almost like writing spiraling characters that bore resemblance to no known script. He took a hesitant step forward. The light intensified, and for an instant, He could swear he heard a voice whisper his name. Ethan! The sound was soft, feminine, layered, as if spoken by many voices at once. He froze. His mind rebelled against the impossibility of it. Yet he could not deny what he had heard. The sound came not from the walls but from inside his head, vibrating deep in his skull. He wanted to call out, to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The carvings pulsed again, and the voice returned, this time not as a word but as an emotion, recognition. He stumbled backward until his back struck the cold wall of the chamber. His breath came in shallow bursts. He needed to leave, to get out of the tunnels, to see the sun again, but his body refused to obey. Instead, he sank to the floor, clutching the recorder. Audio anomaly detected, he whispered hoarsely. Possible hallucination, environmental stress response, lack of oxygen. He stopped. The air in the chamber was clean, rich, perfectly breathable. He wasn't suffocating. A faint tremor ran through the ground beneath him. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Somewhere far in the depths of the city, a deep, resonant sound echoed a low, mournful tone that vibrated through the walls. It was not mechanical. It sounded alive. He rose unsteadily, gripping his pack, and looked around. The walls had dimmed, but the crystal continued to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm, as though it had settled into a new equilibrium. Ethan realized with dread that he might have activated something far beyond his understanding. He turned toward the exit, his mind torn between awe and fear. The doorway still stood open, the faint glow from the corridor beckoning like a lifeline. He hurried toward it, his steps echoing across the floor. But as he reached the threshold, he felt a subtle shift in the air. The hum intensified again, deeper this time, and a faint light spread through the cracks of the walls outside the chamber. The entire city was awakening. Ethan broke into a run. The corridors that had been silent now throbbed with muted light. Patterns along the walls flickered to life, illuminating pathways that stretched farther than his light could reach. The once stagnant air began to circulate, carrying a whispering sound that almost resembled voices. The hairs on his arms stood on end. He stopped at the base of the spiral staircase and looked upward. The faint glimmer of sunlight far above seemed impossibly distant now. The hum grew louder. Beneath his feet, a vibration ran through the floor, rhythmic and powerful. He knew that to stay here might mean to be trapped or worse, but curiosity, that fatal human urge, held him still. He turned back toward the main corridor one last time. The carvings now glowed fully, the entire wall alive with shifting light. It was beautiful, terrifyingly beautiful. And within that luminescence, he thought he saw figures moving shadows within the light itself. They weren't human, at least not in any way he recognized. Tall, graceful, featureless, they moved with a fluidity that made his heart lurch. They were like memories made visible. The whispering grew louder, overlapping until it formed a kind of harmonic music. Words began to emerge from the sound, though he could not understand them. Still they resonated inside him, stirring emotions that were not his own. Grief, longing, hope. His legs trembled. He stumbled backward, clutching the railing of the staircase. A flash of movement caught his eye, a ripple of light sweeping across the plaza where he had first entered. The ground itself began to glow, forming concentric circles that expanded outward. It was like watching a living organism stir from centuries of sleep. He took one last look at the glowing city, then forced himself upward. His hands scraped against the stone as he climbed, the stairway vibrating beneath his touch. The hum chased him upward, a sound too vast to belong to anything earthly. By the time he reached the upper passage, his chest burned from exertion. The narrow tunnel opened ahead, and beyond it, a faint slice of daylight shone through the sand. When he finally emerged into the open air, the desert sky felt blinding. The sun had already climbed high, baking the dunes in light. He stumbled away from the entrance, falling to his knees in the sand. The door he had uncovered was now barely visible, half swallowed again by drifting grains. Behind him, the hum had faded, replaced by the whisper of the wind. It was as though the desert had sealed its secret once more. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the endless horizon. The compass in his pocket was still warm, pulsing faintly against his leg. He pulled it out and turned it over in his hands. The brass surface, once dull, now shimmered faintly with a golden hue. On the back, where there had been only scratches before, a new symbol had appeared. One of the same spirals he had seen carved into the walls below. A chill ran through him. Whatever had happened down there had marked him. He could still feel the rhythm of the city inside his chest, a pulse that did not belong to him. Somewhere beneath the dunes, the lost civilization still breathed, waiting. The thought filled him with both dread and exhilaration. He had found what his grandfather had spent his life seeking, but it was no treasure of gold or relics. It was a living memory, something beyond human comprehension, and now part of it lived in him. He looked out over the desert as the wind picked up, erasing the last traces of his footprints. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a faint shimmer at the horizon, a mirage perhaps, or the ghost of the city itself, still glowing far below the sands. Then it was gone. The desert was silent once more, vast and eternal. But Ethan knew that silence was only the surface. Beneath it, the world was awake. He rose slowly, the compass clutched tightly in his hand, and turned toward the distant road. Whatever mysteries lay buried under the dunes, they would not rest forever. He would return when he was ready, when he understood what he had touched. For now the desert could keep its secret, but its pulse would never leave him. As he walked away, the wind carried a faint, haunting note, a tone that seemed to echo his own heartbeat. And somewhere deep below, in the city of stone and light, the crystal pulsed once more, waiting for the next seeker of truth. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss the next one. Check out my other videos for more incredible stories and mysteries like this. And hey, share this video with your friends. It really helps the channel grow.